It's been said that every quilt tells a story, and it's so true. But I also believe every quilter has a story to tell. I wanted to hear about the people behind these wonderful quilts and thought you'd enjoy hearing about their lives also. Welcome to A Quilter's Life. I am so glad that Jenifer Gaston listened to the Quilting on the Side podcast episode where Andi and Tori interviewed me. Jeni and I didn't know each other even though we only live about 15 minutes apart. After our interview for this episode on A Quilter's Life, we continued to chat and found out that she had known my husband's grandmother and even had been in my house years ago. How do you like that for a coincidence? During the interview, we talk about Jeni's fabric line, Scrap Happy. Somehow I forgot to mention the name of it in the interview and wanted to make sure I mentioned it here. Jeni, thank you so much for joining us on A Quilter's Life.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, this was interesting on how you found out about A Quilter's Life. Share with me what happened.
I was out on my morning walk, and I like to listen to podcasts or radio shows while I'm walking. And I just started searching for something about quilters and quilting and ran across the Quilting on the Side podcast. And I thought, oh, what's that? So I was listening to that and heard them interviewing you. And you were talking about interviewing a woman that I know from Williamstown, Jean Pickering. And I thought, I know Jean. And so I thought, wow, that's really interesting. And so then I went to find your podcast and started listening to the interview you did of Jean and realized that you were interviewing her in person and that you lived here locally. And I thought, what? There's someone who does podcasts about quilting here? So I thought, well, I need to look into that. And so I listened to the whole interview and it was lovely. And Jean is a really wonderful woman. She used to come into our shop sometimes and look for specific things. And she was just really nice. She had us to her house one time, my sister Gretchen and I. And I don't remember why we were there, but she gave us a little, tour of her downstairs with her quilts. And it was just really nice. And she was very nice. So I just kind of searched you out from there because I was really interested to know who else in the area might you have interviewed. So that's how I found you.
That was so much fun because I found Andi and Tori online and we've talked over the years. I've interviewed both of them too. Now, you mentioned you had put their podcast on. Had you just found their podcast also?
Yes, I had just found it. I guess I haven't really searched out podcasts that much, but it just randomly I found it and thought it looked interesting.
Well, let's jump back to tell us about where you were born and raised.
I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My parents were from that area, Swissville, Pennsylvania, which is right outside of Pittsburgh. Shortly after I was born, they moved to Harrisville, Pennsylvania for my dad's work for his job. And that eventually brought us here, was a job.
So you moved here as a child?
Yes.
And to the West Virginia side or Ohio side?
West Virginia. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And share a special childhood memory.
Well, there are so many. But one of the first things I thought of, maybe because I was talking about this to one of my sisters recently, but I remember as a little girl coming out of church with my family, and my little sister and my father and I would hold hands and skip all the way down the hill to where the car was parked after church. And it just was a good memory of doing something fun like that. But I guess probably favorites would be spending weeks with our grandma in Pittsburgh, and she would take us all over the place and we would just have so much fun. And then family I have 4 siblings and my parents, and Christmas Eve was always extra special. And we didn't bring our Christmas tree in the house until Christmas Eve. And we decorated it together, and Mom would be in the kitchen making ham sandwiches after Christmas Eve service. And Dad and all of us kids would decorate the tree with the tinsel and everything. And when we were all done, Mom had a favorite ornament that was like pink. I think it was a spun cotton antique ornament. It was a pear, and it was pink, and it had some glitter on it. And she would hang that on the tree every year. And it just was really special to me. And probably less than 10 years ago, I asked my mother if she would leave that to me. And she says, well, I'll give it to you right now. And I said, well, no, I enjoy watching you put it on the tree. And she says, well, I want you to have it now so you can enjoy it on your tree and I can see you enjoying it. And I said, well, I'll make you a deal. If you come to my house and put it on my tree every year until you're gone. And so that was the deal we made. So I have her pear ornament and I cherish it.
What a wonderful compromise. I just love that.
We made a few of those compromises over the years, me and my mom.
I have just seen so many times where something is promised, and then when the person's gone, something happens where you don't get it. So that just thrills my heart. Well, other than quilting, did you have employment?
I did. My mother and father stressed on all of the 4 girls the importance of us learning how to do something. I wanted to be a wife and a mother and a homemaker. That was my goal. That's all I wanted to do. And they said, well, that's all fine and good, but if something happens to your husband, you need to learn how to do something. And they had us all take typing and shorthand and accounting. And of course, none of those things appealed to me. But and so when it was time to make decisions, probably should have made the decisions before my senior year, but I was very busy taking Art 1, Art 2, Home Ec 1, Home Ec 2, because that's what I liked. I had no idea what I was going to do. And my father actually came to me and said, well, have you ever thought about joining the service? And I said, well, no. And he said, well, it's like a regular job. I mean, yes, there are soldiers, but there are people that work on the base. There's doctors, lawyers, dentists, secretaries, there's grocery stores, there's everything. And so there's a lot of different jobs you could do in the service that they would train you to do, and they would pay for you to learn and provide you with your clothes and a place to live, and they'd pay you for all of it. That's the way he said it to me. And I thought, oh, really? And he said, well, yeah, I think you might look into it. And my brother had been in the Air Force, and my mother thought maybe for a woman, it would be better to join the Air Force or the Navy. When I asked my brother about it, he said, don't join the Air Force. He didn't have the best experience. So I called the recruiters the next day, the Air Force and the Navy. And the Air Force people sent me a pamphlet in the mail. And the Navy sent me a huge manila envelope packed full of stuff, a T-shirt, bumper stickers, all the things. And I thought, the Navy wants me. So I called and I asked the recruiter what I needed to do. And he said, well, you need to come down and you're going to take a test. And my mind was, no, not a test. I don't want to take any tests. But I went down and I took the test, and they told me I scored really high and I could choose pretty much any kind of a job that I wanted, which really surprised me because, like I said, I took Art 1, Art 2, Home Ec 1, Home Ec 2. I really didn't think of myself as the smartest crayon in the box. So I was really excited, and they showed me all of the different jobs, and I chose to be a dental technician. they said, great, there isn't an opening for that school until probably next year. So we'll have to put you on the delayed entry program and you'll have to go get a physical in Columbus. And so I was really excited, actually. And then they called me one day and they said, hey, there's an opening in the fall. So we got to go do your physical. So I got out of school that day and got to go to Columbus with the recruiter and go through all that. Well, I raised my right hand and was sworn in that day. So I hadn't even graduated high school. I was only 17 and had already sworn in to the Navy. I tell you, that really just made me feel so good and so proud that I knew what I was going to do. It was just a really neat feeling. But I remember a lot of my friends thinking I was crazy. Shy Jeni? Jeni, who turns red if you mention a boy's name, is going to go in the Navy. But it was a good experience for me. I really liked it. It was hard, but it was a good experience. And then as a civilian, I worked as a dental assistant for a few years until my husband and I were ready to start our family. So I quit working, and for the next 10 years or so, I was a stay-at-home mom that got to do her hobbies and live her goal in life of being a mom and a homemaker.
It just blows me away. Nothing like getting out of school to go do a physical and you're signed into.
I know.
Wow.
My mother was a little shocked that I was actually signed in already.
But being 17 didn't. Well, had they already signed papers?
I can't really remember, but I feel like there were papers signed about the school that I would want and things like that. I know that once I got to boot camp, we were sworn in again. So I don't know what the one when I went to my physical, I don't know what that one meant, but maybe it was they just do that so that you think you can't back out. I don't know. Once you're in boot camp, you are thinking, oh my goodness, what have I done?
Whenever I think of boot camp, I think of, did you also have to do the mask?
Yes, with the gas mask.
Yeah.
And,
Oh.
It was scary.
I would think so. Wow. So since you moved here as a child and you're still here, well, obviously, if you were in the military, where did they send you?
My boot camp was in Orlando, Florida. And then my schooling for my dental tech schooling was in San Diego. And then I was stationed at a Marine Corps base, Cherry Point, in North Carolina for a little over a year, I would say. And that was a Marine Corps base at a naval hospital. Then after that, I went back out to San Diego. My husband was in San Diego. He was also in the Navy. I was already signed up, but I met him before I went to boot camp. And he signed up for the Navy. I always tell people he followed me into the Navy. He was on a ship out to sea. I didn't really know which base his ship was ported at. I just knew San Diego. But when I got there and checked in, my chief asked me if I had any family out there. And I said, well, I have a cousin in LA and a boyfriend that's on a ship that's ported somewhere in San Diego that's out to sea. And he asked me, well, what ship is it? And I said, it's the USS Chandler. And he said, oh, well, that ship ports here when it's in. And I couldn't believe it. It was just, there are so many bases out there. To actually be at the same base was really neat. So that was the last place I was at. And then after we were married, we were expecting a baby. And I got out just a little bit before the baby was due. But my husband still had time in. When he was going to go out to sea again, he moved me back home so I wouldn't be by myself out there. So that's really all the traveling I did. He went around the world a couple of times. So
So you came back to West Virginia. Mm-hmm. Now, was he from this area too?
Yes, he was from Parkersburg.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. I thought maybe you met him out there and dragged him back here.
I say he followed me into the Navy, but he probably says I followed him to California. And that would be true.
Is there anything else about your family you would like to share?
We have a very close family. We're very, very blessed. Our parents were wonderful. We lost our mother. It's almost 4 years ago. But we still have our father, and we're very fortunate to still have him. He's 91. We've all been able to help. We helped care for our mother while she had dementia so that Dad could keep her at home. And we've all been able to help Dad through a battle with cancer that he's been going through since she passed away. Everybody just steps up, and we've been really blessed there. I guess it would be a testament to Mom and Dad and how good they were. We just all love to be with them and love to be able to help. And our family is very musical. Everybody sings. There's a lot of instruments, guitars, pianos, flutes, all sorts of instruments in our family. And we love to get together. Once a year, we have an annual family sing-along Christmas party. And we made books of all the songs of the Christmas carols written up in the Ray Conniff style with all the doo-ahs. That was what we grew up listening to from our parents. And so we try to gather everybody together, our siblings, their kids, and we sit around and sing as many Christmas carols as we want and have dinner. This year will be our 32nd annual Falsick Family Potluck Dinner Christmas Sing-Along Party. And I would say it's the most fun time that we get together, and we all really enjoy it a lot.
You said you were one of 5 children, and they all live in this area?
Everybody lives here. Most everybody has moved away and come back. One sister and I have lived here the longest, only leaving for the service or she left for college. And then the rest of the time we were always here. The other siblings moved away for longer periods of time and then came back. And so we're all real close. Most of us can walk to our father's house.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I walk with one of my sisters when she's in town. She has a cabin out in the mountains of West Virginia, and we walk whenever she's in town together.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
If you had the opportunity to talk to your great-great-great-great-grandchildren, well, first of all, thinking about that in future generations, what do you think they would think back on you and say about you?
I would hope that they would know that I had a very deep faith, that has brought me through many, many trials, and that would mean something to them as it has meant to me through my life. I hope that they would remember that I love to gather our family together and host. I love hosting. It doesn't even have to be family. I love to throw the dinner. I love to throw the party. I just love having everybody at my house. That's the main thing. I would like them to know that I loved to have my family around me all the time.
And then what would you want to say to them?
I would want them to be strong in faith and to find, aside from whatever it is that they do for a living, to find a hobby, something that they love to do, that they can spend their time doing when they're not working. I just hate for anybody to just be bored. I think it's so important to have something special that you like to do for yourself. You could share it with other people, but you don't have to. And I just think it's important to have something that you love to do that doesn't work. It could be your work. Mine turned into my work, but I still really love to do it.
Yeah, these hobbies can turn into work. Also, besides quilting, Are there other crafts that you do or that you have done in the past?
Mm-hmm. When I was really little, maybe 7 or 8, I don't think it was my mother who taught me. I think an aunt taught me how to crochet. And she taught me how to make these little bookworms. They had like a pom-pom on their tail. And and I made so many of those. And then my mother then showed me how to turn a chain into like a blanket for Barbies. Well, I was really big into playing Barbies. So I made a lot of Barbie Afghans, and she taught all 4 of us girls how to sew. So we would make clothes for our skipper. Well, we really had skippers. We didn't really have Barbies. We had a lot of skippers, though. So we made doll clothes. And then as a teenager, would make simple clothes for myself, usually like a little tank top or, something like that. And then my brother would at Christmas send home for Christmas really neat crafting type things. One year it was paint by number on velvet. And one year he gave me a floating candle making set. I made, I don't know how many floating candles. And then another year it was a resin casting. So I made a lot of paperweights with pennies and things in them. Mom and Dad were just really good about letting us do all these things and make our messes. They had a little place set up in the basement where I could have a hot plate for my candle making. It's a wonder we didn't set the house on fire. But Mom was into pretty much every craft that came down the pike. She made our clothes, a lot of clothes. She knitted and all of those things. So did a lot of crafting. And then when I was married and a civilian, I learned how to cross stitch. Loved cross stitch, did that a lot. I still like it, but I really haven't done it in a long time. And when I tried to pick it up last spring, my eyes did not like that. So I didn't keep going, that I maybe would need a different kind of a background that wasn't so tiny spacing. And then I got into quilting. My mother and her 2 sisters were given quilt tops that their grandmother had made but never finished. My grandma didn't quilt, but she also did lots of other crafts. So grandma never finished those quilts, but my mother's 2 sisters lived in Pittsburgh still while we were all here, and they learned how to quilt so they could finish those quilts. Well, my mother wasn't going to let her sisters learn how to quilt without her learning to quilt. So Dad drove her up to Amish country, and she had the Amish ladies show her how to quilt. And so my mother got deep into quilting, and she did not finish great-grandma's quilt. She worked on it. Then she started just making lots of other things. And so I now have my great-grandmother's quilt that is not finished, that I think I will have to finish someday. So I wanted to learn also. So I bought fabric. My mother came over one day and helped me cut out my first pieced quilt, and I was hooked. And so I worked on learning things and quilting for a couple of years. And then I used to get a subscription to Country Living magazine, and they would show these beautiful hooked rugs. And I wanted to know how to do that. And my mother told me that my grandmother had hooked at least one that she knew of. Mom had grandma's hooks, so she gave them to me. And I ordered some wool and a hook and a book about it and taught myself how to do it. I just was crazy for it. And next thing you know, I'm dyeing wool and teaching classes and making kits. And that's kind of what spurred on my business. It was nice because I was a stay-at-home mom. My husband would get laid off from his job a lot, and it gave me a way to earn a little money to help us with teaching these classes and selling the kits. So it just turned into a business and drug my sister Gretchen into the business with me, and she didn't want to go back to work after having her last child. So that is what started the whole ball of the business, was the rug hooking.
We'll jump back into that in just a minute. But do you think all these crafts that you were able to do, well, it sounds like they did, they showed up in your quilting?
Yes, they have. The rug hooking, working with wool, I did a lot of wool applique. Some other hobbies are, well, I love to walk and cook, and I love flowers. So I have a lot of flowers. So a lot of my applique designs in my quilts and rugs are flowers, birds, sometimes cats or dogs. So yeah, it has.
You mentioned your mother introduced you to quilting. Mm-hmm. She was getting into it, and remind me again how she introduced you to quilting.
Well, she really got me over the hump to start quilting because she was so excited and her sisters were so excited and they were cranking out all these quilts. So I really wanted to do that too, because it was also something that I would see in the Country Living magazine, were these beautiful quilts. And, you know, being a stay-at-home mom, I wanted to decorate my house. And I couldn't really just afford to go and buy all the things you might want to decorate your house. I had my cross stitch on the walls and things like that. So I thought, well, I need to learn how to do that. And so Mom got me doing that. And her sisters sort of had a quilting club up in Pittsburgh. And so sometimes we would drive up and join them. And it was a lot of fun doing a show and tell and just seeing what everybody was making. It was a lot of fun. And I just was really deep into the quilting. And I got to go on a retreat with them and to Vermont, a bus trip. And it was a lot of fun.
Oh, wow. Clear up to Vermont. You couldn't find anything closer?
No, I guess not. It was the Pittsburgh Guild. They were going to the Vermont Quilt Festival. I think this was in 1999. So I wanted to go. So they invited me. And one of my cousins, who's just maybe a couple years older than me, she was also deep into the quilting and was going. And she said, you have to go. So I went with them. And my father just didn't understand why a 30-something-year-old woman would want to go on a bus trip with a bunch of old ladies wearing denim jumpers. But it was just so fun. I really loved it.
It sounds like a blast.
Yeah. They would call us, Mom and I, we were the West Virginia Quilt Club that would join the Pittsburgh Quilt Club sometimes. And got my other sisters kind of started to dabble a little bit in being interested in it too, a little later, but they were interested too eventually.
How fun.
Yeah.
Do you happen to have a favorite quilt?
I believe I do. It's called A Life of Plenty, and it was a quilt that I did for a sew-along on my blog that I had years ago. It has wool applique, there's velvet applique on it, cotton, and patchwork. It is one of my favorites. And my cousin Jill quilted it for me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I've made a lot of quilts. It was really kind of hard to pick out a favorite, but I think that one is my favorite that I have made.
You surprised me. I see the long arm here, and you talked about hand quilting a little bit, so I assumed you would have quilted it, but your cousin quilted it.
My cousin quilted it. I was really busy at the time that I was doing that quilt. The Martingale Publishing Company wanted me to do a book with them. And so I was working on making the quilts and writing the patterns for that book while the sew-along was going on. And so I just knew I couldn't do all of it, and I really wanted it to be quilted. So I sent it to my cousin, and she did a beautiful custom quilting on it. I did more hand quilting in the beginning of my quilting journey, but as I got busy with our quilt shop and with designing my own patterns and things like that, I really sort of needed to have things quilted a little faster. So I started machine quilting first with my home machine, and then we got a long arm at our shop. And so I learned how to do that. And now at home, I have one, but the frame that you see is brand new. That just got assembled this weekend. I had a smaller little hoop frame. That's what I was using up until now. So I haven't even turned the machine on since this was assembled. I've had the machine for about 4 years, but the frame is new. So I'm excited to use it. It sure takes up a lot of space.
Oh, but it's beautiful. I bet you just are itching to get started on something.
I am. I hung a few quilts on there just to show you some favorites, and one that my mother made for me.
Oh, cool. Well, the tools have changed over the years. Mm-hmm. Is there a tool that you are so happy you have?
Yes. When I started quilting, they had rotary cutters. So, I mean, I'm pretty much in the modern quilting world. But I was thinking about some of the things that I really, really love that I have. And one is a light desk that my husband got me for Christmas a few years ago. Because when I do my own patterns, I often have an applique in them. And so in order to create nice patterns, I'd love to be able to use that light desk to really trace things and make sure that they're the right size after I finish making my quilt. And I kind of have a backward way of doing things. I don't usually do the drawing first and then cut that out and make it. I usually actually just cut the fabric. And then from that, I make the pattern. So I think I'm a better cutter than I am drawer. I just can kind of cut out the shape I want. So I really love my light desk. And I am a hoarder of rulers. I love rulers, all the different rulers to do all of the neat things. I have way more rulers than I'll ever use, I'm sure. But whenever something new comes out, I like to try it out and get it if I like it. So I guess that's pretty much it.
They have made so many neat rulers for so many different things we do.
Yeah.
But you can't use a ruler with your freehand cutting.
No, that's true.
And as I look around, I see so many neat appliques that you have done that I'm thinking, wow. So that was freehand.
Some of the time I can draw, but I end up changing things. I'm glad to have an eraser on my pencil. So I do draw. I also can cut really well. I saw something funny on a Facebook group that I'm involved in, and somebody posted a meme and it said, who knew that the cutting out of all of those McCall's paper dolls out of the magazines would come in so handy later for applique cutting? And it's the truth. I cut a lot of paper dolls in my time. That was one of my favorite things.
You just never know what from our childhood is going to be useful.
I know. Who knew home ec would have come in so handy in art class?
And who knew the shorthand would not be needed?
It wasn't. But, I was pretty good at shorthand. And I recently found a really old book with shorthand, and I bought it just to, have. I don't know if I'll ever try it again, but I always thought that was a neat skill to have. I don't remember it, though.
When I started, I was just shocked at all the different steps we have with quilting. So do you have a favorite part, or do you like each step along the way?
I do like all the steps, but I think I really enjoy designing the project and getting it figured out, what it's going to be and what size it's going to be and how the pieces will fit together. It seems kind of funny for somebody who hated geometry to love figuring out blocks and designing blocks. I should talk to my old math teacher. And I don't really call it geometry, though. Quilt math. I enjoy that, but I really love coming up with an idea in my head of an applique or something and then figuring out a way to get it into a pieced quilt. So my quilts are really pretty traditional as far as the blocks, but I like sticking in that applique and maybe using the blocks in a different way. And that's probably my favorite part. If I have a quilt that's very repetitive in a block, I get pretty bored of it fast. So I really have to stick at it to get those done, because then I enjoy quilting it and I really like to bind. I like binding. I'm really particular on my binding, and it's exciting because then that project's done and I can be thinking about the next one if I haven't already started another one before that one's finished, which I do a lot.
I'm curious, on your binding, there's people that like smaller bindings and people that like larger bindings. What size do you usually make yours?
I usually make them 2 1/4 and then fold for any size quilt pretty much. Little quilts, I'll do 1 1/2 and just do a single. But for my big quilts, I do 2 1/4.
Interesting.
Like it kind of tight.
I just switched. I always cut my pieces 2 inches, so they folded over to 1. So they were small.
Yeah.
But then I just bought an AccuQuilt at QuiltCon this past year, and it came with the 2 1/2 inch strip. I was like, well, I have that. So I'm enlarging it to 2 1/2.
When I write my patterns, I write the pattern for 2 1/2. That way there's plenty of fabric in the materials list. But when I make the quilt myself, I do it a little smaller. Shh, don't tell anyone.
It's out there now.
Yeah. It's out there that I cut first, then draw.
Well, what was your worst quilting experience?
I could think of 2. The first one is my first piece quilt. It had sawtooth stars in it, so there were a lot of points. And the directions did not tell you to make it like you would make flying geese or half square triangles by cutting the rectangles or squares and then drawing the line and flipping. It was cutting triangles, and I did a lot of stretching and pulling and steaming, and I had to redo those so many times that I don't think there's any points on those stars now. But I finished it and I hand quilted it and it is done and I still have it. And somehow I still kept wanting to quilt. And even though I was very frustrated with that. Another one, I was making a quilt from a kit from our shop, and it had a whole section, like a pieced corner section that you had to sew on to the center section. And it was in the evening, around 9 o'clock in the evening. And I was really tired. Somehow I sewed it on backwards. I was just so upset. And so I'm ripping and ripping and ripping and press everything, put it back together, sew it again. I did the same thing a second time. And I just was so mad at myself. And so I decided that it was time to go to bed. And so I did go ahead and rip it out that second time and pressed it and then laid it out on the table the way it was supposed to go together and then went to bed. And the next day I fixed it. But I guess that was it. I really couldn't think of any other really bad situations.
It is so frustrating, especially when you knew you did it wrong the first time. You figure it out and then you do it and you realize you did the exact same thing.
Yeah.
That is frustrating. Well, obviously we can do a lot of things with our time. Why do you think you continue to make quilts, or why did you spend time making quilts rather than doing anything else that you were able to do?
I think that it's a way to be creative. I really love to make things. Ever since I was a little girl, I've been making things. And to me, it's just a really useful thing to make. I can give them as gifts and I can keep them for myself to enjoy and my family. I think it's just an enjoyment, something that I love, and I love to share it.
And you mentioned giving them away. Who do you make your quilts for?
I've made quilts for my kids, my granddaughters, friends. I've given them for donations, for charity, for organizations. I love to give a quilt to somebody that I love and wrap them up in it is fresh from the dryer. I guess that's pretty much it. I don't sell them. I'd rather give them away than sell them. I'm sure my sisters are going to hear this and, oh, we're going to get quilts this year at Christmas.
Are you working on something special right now?
Yes, I haven't fully started it. I did a test block. My son wants a king-size quilt for he and his wife for their bed. They live in New York. So I've designed it. I've showed it to them and they like it. They picked out the fabric from my fabric line. So they're excited to have that. So I'm anxious to get started on that when my husband and I are back from our vacation. And hopefully I'll be able to put it on my new big frame. It should fit the king size. So it must be crazy. I've never made a quilt that big. So, but it should be fairly easy to put together and it'll be special to be able to give it to them. And then I have a little project I'm working on with my fabric line. Just something fun to do. I don't really have a purpose for it other than to make it.
How exciting to make that for your kids. Share a quilting tip.
I taught a lot of quilting classes when we had our shop. I had a woman who all around her seat on the floor was a lot of thread because she constantly used her ripper during class. And she was a beginner. She had taken a beginner class at another shop and was struggling still. I was trying to help her and she was having a really hard time getting things to line up. And after several classes, she came to the shop and told me that she thought she was going to give up quilting because she just couldn't get things to turn out perfect. And I told her, well, that's definitely your choice, but are you enjoying any part of it? And she said, well, I am. And I really wanted to learn how to do it. I really wanted to do it, but I just don't think I'll ever get there, that I'll ever be good at it. And I said, well, will you do me one more favor at our next class? And she says, what? And I said, well, don't rip anything out. Just put it together and finish it and quilt it and bind it and put it on the wall and stand back and just be proud that you finished it. Because I don't think she had finished anything yet. And then the next one, you'll be a little better. And then the one after that, you'll be a little better. None of us start out perfect when we do this. So just keep going and finish it and cherish that first quilt that's not perfect. And I told her about my first quilt with all of the points cut off. I said, so we all, start somewhere and it's okay if it's not perfect. She did. She continued. And that was probably in 2010, 2011. And she's still quilting to this day and really enjoying it. So that would be my tip for a beginner. Don't give up. If it's something that you really want to do, just keep doing it and you'll get there. And if you don't, that's okay too. It's okay to have an imperfect quilt. You can still wrap up in it and be warm.
Uh-huh. And most people don't see those little things that we see.
They don't. I know. I don't want anyone to look too careful at mine. So and I've been quilting for over 30 years.
Well, you mentioned your business a couple times here. How did it end up? You had a hobby and it became a business. How did that process work?
There was a local quilt shop and I was helping the owner she wasn't a quilter until right before she decided to open the shop. And my mother and I were helping her. We would teach some classes, and that is right about the time I started to get into rug hooking. And she was going to a quilting retreat out in Missouri and invited me to go along to take a rug hooking class there from a well-known rug hooker. She said, "I'll pay for your rug hooking class if you will teach it in the shop." And so I paid my way to go and everything, but she paid for my class. And while we were there, I got a book on dyeing wool and some supplies. And when we got back, she ordered wool in just like a tan color. And I started dyeing wool and teaching classes at her shop. Well, that brought quite an interest, and my classes would earn some money for me. And I thought, gosh, I can support my hobby now because it's not cheap to buy really good quilt fabric and 100% wool. So it just sort of turned into a little home business on the side to support my hobby. But I wanted to do my own designs, not designs that were already out there and in books to teach. I wanted it to be my own thing. And when I had a few designed, my younger sister, Gretchen, who lived in Texas at the time, she said, "Why don't you send me some pictures of your rugs? You should have a website and you could have a business." And really, there weren't that many online businesses like that at the time. This was about 1999. And I said, "Well, I don't even have a computer." And she said, "Well, that's okay. Just send me your pictures." So I just put them in the mail and mailed them to her. I didn't have a computer or digital anything. In the meantime, one of my older sisters had an older computer, and she gave it to me and showed me how to turn it on. And a few days later, Gretchen calls me, "Well, you have a website." And so I bought a digital camera, and that way I could send her pictures and she would put them on the website. And all of a sudden I was getting orders, and it was like, do you remember there was a commercial years ago where, somebody had a website and there was a counter on it, and they're all standing around looking at the counter on the computer, and it's like going way up, and they're all excited that their business just took off. Not that it was like that huge, but it was just so exciting that so many people were finding it. It's like I said, there really probably were only a handful of rug hooking businesses at that time. So it was really exciting. And we called it the rug hooking store. So it was all the wool and the rug hooking patterns. And I would make kits, and shops could order them wholesale and stock their shops with my kits. And I talked her into, "You should do this too," because she really didn't want to go back to work. And so I planned a trip out to visit her in Texas and showed her how to hook a rug, and she really loved it. So we shared the website, and we took turns with the orders as they came in. And we didn't keep track as to who got more orders or anything. We just took turns, and I would send her the kits because I was dyeing all the wool and everything, but I wouldn't cut the wool strips for her. She bought a cutter and she would cut them herself. That was really labor intensive. And we shared. And then I think the next year she was in for a visit, and I showed her how to dye wool so that she could do that part in Texas. We would talk to each other every single day. "Oh, I wish you lived here so we could just open up a cute little shop together." In 2004, it happened. Her husband got a new job position. He looked for a job here so that they could move here. And so he got a job here, and we bought a house on the main street in town and fixed it all up and turned it into the cutest little wool shop with quilt fabric because, I was still a quilter. We changed the name from the rug hooking store to the Wool and Willow. And that was in 2004.
Oh, wow.
So it just became a business, and we sure had a lot of fun, and our parents helped us, and they just had a wonderful time being with us at the shop.
Everything's so close here.
Yeah.
Were you able to walk to the shop?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And one of my sisters actually lives there now. We sold her the house when she moved back to town.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
You just mentioned the name of the shop.
Mm-hmm. The willow part, my favorite tree as a child was the weeping willow. We would drive to visit Grandma and family up in Pittsburgh, and all the way there, we were all complaining and whining in the back seat. Dad would tell us to count the deer or something, and I would count the weeping willow trees all the way to Grandma's house. And so they showed up in my hooked rugs and in my quilts. I love embroidery too. And when I was trying to come up with a new name for a shop, a friend of mine came up with that. He said, well, how about the woolen willow? And I said, what? I love that. It's kind of a mouthful, though, especially if you say the woolen willow in Williamstown, West Virginia. And then when we closed the shop, I changed it to Woolen Willow Designs.
And when did that close?
2016, I think, is when we closed the quilt shop. But we still had the building. We had moved from the house up the street to a bigger building and added on. And we had an antique mall that we owned and rented spots out to, and the quilt shop all in one building. And when we started our magazine, we also had our magazine offices there. So when we closed the quilt shop, we still had those other things going on. So it was kind of sad to close the quilt shop, but sometimes we wish we would have just kept that part and not had the others, because we did have an awful lot of fun with our shop, but it was very labor intensive, and something kind of had to go. So we were going in too many different directions. It was exhausting.
Well, that had to have been such a hard decision.
It was. There happened to be a lot of shops in the area at that time, and so we felt like we could let it go because the customers would have somewhere to go. But it was such a wonderful place. I wish you could have seen it. It was just so beautiful and warm and welcoming, and the atmosphere was just warm and cozy. Twinkle lights, antique doors and windows separated the sections, and the fabric was displayed in antiques and cabinets that our father built. And it was just beautiful, beautiful shop. I really miss it. I think our customers really miss it too. I hear that a lot when I run into people.
Yeah. While you had the shop, you and your sister started publishing a magazine?
Yes.
And the name of the magazine?
Primitive Quilts and Projects magazine. You know, most quilt shops would have magazines to sell. There are a lot of really big name magazines, but none of them really catered to the primitive style, which is what our style was. They might have one project in their magazine once in a while. And a customer came into the shop one day and was looking at the magazines, and she said, why doesn't somebody have a magazine just for us people that like the primitive style? And a light bulb came on, and my sister was walking by, and I said, hey, let's start publishing a magazine. And she said, okay. And we high-fived. We decided to go to dinner at the Mexican restaurant in Marietta and talk about it over margaritas. And so we talked about it and called one of our older sisters to see if she would be interested in joining us on the venture. She took quilting class from our mom and had made a quilt. She was always really proud of us with our shop and everything. And so we thought maybe she would be interested in doing that with us. She lived in the area. Our other sister lived in North Carolina at the time. So we asked her, and she said, sure. And on the way home from work, she was still working her full-time government job. And on the way home from work, she stopped at the Borders, I think it was, bookstore that we used to have in the area, and bought a book on how to publish a magazine, because none of us knew anything about it. And so she read the book. We started having meetings. We got in touch with friends in the area who had Birdwatchers Digest magazine, and they gave us some hints and tips and the names of some people to contact to help us along the way. From having our quilt shop for several years and going to Quilt Market, Gretchen and I had developed relationship with many of pattern and quilt designers. And so we started calling them and asking them, would they be interested in being in the first 4 issues of our magazine? Some of them might have said, have you ever done this before? And we said, no. And they said, okay. So nobody really hesitated. They were all really excited. So we plunged our way into it and people really loved it. They called it a bookazine because it was such a beautiful magazine. And we went to a lot of shows to show it and grew our subscriptions. And it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of work. We were really, really busy. We went to a lot of shows. We had to hire and get more help. And it was quite a lot. And we owned it and ran it from the beginning, which our first issue was the summer of 2011. And then we sold it 5 years ago to another company. And then for 3 or 4 years, we stayed on under contract to still do our jobs that we were doing before. We just didn't have to worry about any of the money or logistics or anything. And then a little over a year ago, our contracts were due to expire, and Gretchen and I decided that we wanted to be done. And our older sister Judy decided she would stay on. And then the new company announced they were going digital. Everybody was so sad. We were really sad too. But I think that they've ended up having a fairly smooth transition to digital, despite I'm sure they lost a lot of subscribers over it because, really the demographic is older and not everybody is into digital. They like holding something in their hands to read and look at and refer back to. I think it's still doing okay, and I still put projects in it too. So,
oh, cool.
And of course, my sister still works for them, so she's interviewed me once or twice. So for the magazine.
How often did you put it out?
It was a quarterly magazine. A lot of people wanted us to go monthly, and we were like, no, it's just too much. It was a lot. I was heavily involved in staging for photography and going with our photographer and doing the proofing the photographs with the photographer. And I would go to the press checks where it was being printed and check everything for color accuracy and everything. And it was a lot. And it was a lot of traveling and stuff. And I was kind of ready to just kind of do my own thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would have kept going, I suppose, had we not sold it, because we did really have fun. But once we didn't own it anymore, it wasn't really as fun because we weren't working together in our building together and having fun in person. We were all on the phone or something. So it just was different.
You were so busy with so many things. At point something has to give.
Yeah.
Another thing that you do and you mentioned is creating patterns. So can you remember back to when you made that first pattern and someone that you didn't know bought it?
Kind of 2 things, because I had started the rug hooking business and would sell the rug hooking patterns. That was really, really exciting that somebody would want to purchase something that I drew out. That was very exciting. The first time that I had something published out there and something real was in Better Homes and Gardens, American Patchwork and Quilting, their Quilt Sampler magazine, where they would go and interview the shop owner and take pictures of their shop. And you had to create a pattern for that article. And so other than our rug hooking stuff being out there, we really hadn't put out, wool and willow patterns. And so that was pretty exciting, having a pattern in a huge magazine like that and having them interview our store. We were one of the top 10 shops in North America. That was 2008. That was really exciting. And then that really got the ball going on doing a lot of quilt patterns. So then when I would start teaching classes at the shop, I would create the patterns. So we had a whole section of our shop that were patterns that I created for our classes and for kits and for shows and things like that. I think having that design in that magazine was probably the most exciting.
It's just thrilling to know there's people out there that want to use what we create.
It is. I had an old rug hooking pattern. I can't remember if I put it in one of our magazines or if it was just on my website, but somebody had purchased the pattern of the rug. They were showing pictures of their home with their primitive style decor, and there was my rug in that picture on Instagram. Even now, I get up this morning and notice that I've got 2 orders for that rug hooking pattern. Wow, that's pretty cool that somebody really wanted that, So it still feels that way, exciting that people would want something that I made. It's a neat feeling. It's a humbling feeling, really. I just, really?
It's so much fun.
Yeah.
Now you have a fabric line with Marcus Fabrics. What happened there? How did that come about?
It came about from a long relationship with Marcus Fabrics. We carried their fabric in our shop. And the lady who was a distributor for a company that sells patterns and fabric and notions to quilt shops would come to our store and we would order from her. And she contacted us and said that a woman from Marcus Fabrics, their marketing director, wanted to meet us and see if there was something that we could do together. And I'm pretty sure we had started the magazine by then. And so we kind of thought they really wanted to maybe advertise and create some sort of a partnership with us. And at that time, Gretchen had actually said to her, well, maybe Jeni would like to design fabric. And I was like taken aback. I would, but I don't know how. I'm not a graphic designer. I don't really know how. And that's what I said. But the lady said, well, maybe she could send me some fabric and I could create some patterns and things like that using their fabric. And I said, oh, okay. So it kind of started like that. And I just always knowing this really nice lady from that company, and they would put ads in our magazine and I would speak to her at Quilt Market all the time, but I never, mentioned the fabric or anything. I might have given her something that I had made on spoon flour, some little line drawing type things, but we didn't really talk about it again after that. I always spoke with her at Quilt Market and we would just chat and very friendly. And I think she even sent a couple of quilt designers our way to publish in our magazine. And then a couple of years ago, she was speaking to my sister about ad space in the magazine and asked her if she knew anyone who did designing and projects with wool. It's like she had forgotten that she had even been in our store. And Gretchen said, well, Jeni. And a lady said, oh, I thought she just did that for the magazine. And Gretchen said, oh, no, she's off, doing her own thing, has her website and everything. So she called me and we got to talking. And it really wasn't about designing fabric at that point, but about designing maybe block of the months and projects using their wool and their fabrics. So she sent me a box of stuff. I didn't pick it out or anything, just sent me some pretty fabrics. And I proceeded in designing a block of the month project that would be a program that they could sell the fabrics to the quilt shop. And then my patterns would be sold through me to the quilt shops. And so that all went off and did well. And I sold patterns. And then they would include me in their Zoom calls with their designers. And I said, are you sure you want me in this meeting? Because I just did that quilt pattern for you. And they said, oh, no, we want you in the meeting. And at one of the meetings, they were talking about if anyone had any design ideas for fabric lines, and they could be small or could even reuse some older things, that they'd struck up a deal with the Smithsonian Museum about using some of the images in quilt designs and patterns and fabric design. So while I was in that meeting listening to them saying this, I thought, maybe I would like to design something, So after the meeting was over, I sent over a little email and said, I think I have an idea. And so next thing you know, I'm designing a fabric line. And so that's how it happened. And they based my first line off of a quilt that I made in 2019, where I made strip pieced blocks and then sewed all of the strip piece blocks together and then did applique on the light versions of the blocks. And then there were dark strip blocks that separated, and then there was applique down the center. I showed them a picture of it and they loved it so much. And they said, will you send us that quilt? I said, well, it's made from fabric I've collected for 30 years. So it's old fabric. And they said, oh no, the colors and just the design of it. We just love it. So I sent them the quilt, and then I sent them images of some drawings that I made, and then some images from some antique quilts that I own. And we made a fabric line out of that. So we made coordinates with drawings and images from antique quilts. And then, what we used to call cheater quilt fabric, they call it convenience cloth now. But they based that cheater fabric on my quilt. But I actually had to cut all the little strips of, they sent me paper images of the fabric that I had created, plus some really old stock fabric that they had, and all in paper form. And I cut out all the little strips and glued them on and made the quilt basically out of paper, and then sent it back to them. And then they created it digitally. And so that's where two of the fabrics came from in my fabric line. It was really neat.
Wow.
Yeah.
There's always so much detail.
Yeah.
Once your fabric line was created, did they send you bolts of it?
Yeah, they sent me, and my contract was I would get 3 yards of everything. I can't remember. Maybe it was 4 yards. But then I ordered bolts because I wanted to have more than that, because I designed a lot of quilts with the digital images of the fabric, and I wanted to make them all because I'm creating the patterns. So I would want to make the quilts and then be able to sell the patterns. So I ended up buying bolts too. So
yeah, I was thinking 3 yards of your own fabric design.
It's not enough. No. And they made a wide backing out of the neutral strip cheater quilt. So I bought a whole bolt of the wide backing, and it's going to go on the back of every quilt I make now, probably. I mean, all the backs of my quilts are going to be the same. I just really love it. So
oh, that's so much fun.
Yeah. I have a second line in the works, but I'm not sure exactly when that will be released. I think they'll show it in paper form at Quilt Market.
Wow. So are you still getting to go to Quilt Market?
I went last year. I might have went the year before too, but I don't plan on going this year. I want to, but mainly probably just to see all the friends that I've made over the years. And I don't know if that's the best idea to spend all that money. So I probably won't go, but usually at the last minute, I think, oh, I'm just going to go. But I don't have plans to go. That's coming up pretty soon. So
it is.
I might try it. I don't think they'll have a spring market, but there's a new company that has a show in the spring. I think it's called H&H, and I think it's in Chicago. So maybe I'll go to that.
And then you're also still teaching classes.
Well, not really. I'm scheduled to teach a class. I haven't really taught much since we closed our shop. I did teach a class at Bolts and Quarters back before the COVID shutdowns, before my mother passed away. I taught one class, then I was just busy helping care for my mom, and then COVID happened and all of that. So I haven't taught since then. I am scheduled to teach one, but we've moved the date till after sometime in October. So I don't even know if we've picked the date yet, but I did have one on the schedule, but we're going to move it. So I do really love teaching, but I think when you get away from doing something for a while, it's like, well, gosh, I haven't taught for so long. I hope I remember.
I'm sure that will come back to you. Yeah. But with so much going on, if you have to choose between two things and not spread yourself too thin.
Yeah.
Is there anything else about your business or businesses that you wanted to share?
Now I just have the one, which is my pattern and my fabric designing. I don't know how long I'll do either of those, but I'll probably do patterns for a long time. I do sew-alongs in a couple of Facebook groups. One of them is my own sew-along group, and I haven't really done a sew-along with my own group in a long time, but it's called Primitive Stitchin' with Jenifer Gaston, and that's on Facebook. And then the other one on Facebook is called Stitching Among Friends, and I'm in a group of 5 other designers, and we do lots of sew-alongs. And it's a small group with just 6 of us, so you can usually get through the quilt pretty quickly, and they're not really large. We just finished one up, and we're getting ready to start another one up in October. And that's been a lot of fun and really fun working with these other 5 designers. We have a lot of fun in the back end, talking to each other. We're very supportive of each other and give each other a lot of good ideas and advice even. So it would be the reason why I would go to market, would just be even just to see those ladies in person. I really enjoy doing the sew-alongs. I think that's pretty much all I do as a business.
Do you find the sew-alongs keep you on track?
I think they do. They kind of keep my mind going because I'm not just doing it for myself. It's something that has to fit in with what the other ladies are doing. And so might think outside the box a little bit. I might not choose this fabric or this color, but it kind of helps you to think about doing things in different ways, I think.
Yeah. Might see it from someone else's perspective a little bit more. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And share what your website is.
My website is woolenwillowdesigns.com. And I have a Facebook page that's also the same, Woolen Willow Designs. And then I'm on Instagram as Jenifer Gaston and Facebook, Jenifer Falsick Gaston.
And I'm going to mention your name, Jenifer, has a 1 N?
Yes, 1 N. I don't know why. I think Mom and Dad wanted me to be a little different. I didn't like it as a teenager because I couldn't buy jewelry with my name on it. I couldn't get one of those cute license plates for my bike either. But it's okay now. I don't mind.
Jeni, thank you so much for joining us on A Quilter's Life. This was a blast getting to talk to you and find out more of your story.
Thank you so much for having me. I was a little nervous, but also very excited and really excited to have found you on my walk. And I'm anxious to listen to more of the podcasts, the interviews that you've done. It was a really good experience. Thank you.
Thanks for doing this with me.
You're welcome.
You can find more stories on aquilterslife.com or subscribe on your favorite podcast player so each episode will be downloaded automatically. Also, I want to hear about you and your wonderful quilts. Please contact me, Paula Chamberlain, through the website to set up an interview. And as always, thanks for listening.